pleasure to see you, Lily.
You too.
Congratulations on the film. Fascinating story, obviously, and how much were you able to dive into her life and her personal circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, it was, for me, fascinating getting to learn not only about Elizabeth and her story and her dedication and her, how much she gave to Churchill and to sort of her part in the war, but learning about Churchill from her perspective. And her memoir is fascinating in its detail, and because there are a series of letters that she wrote to her mother while she was working for him through the war. So it's not like her recollections of him with hindsight, it's what happened then and there. So it's beautiful and moving and hilarious and exact. So to have that information to then build a character on was sort of a gift.
And exact is how the film feels, because it doesn't portray any character in any heroic form or different from what the reality should have been. So how interesting was it also as a circumstance, as a consequence, to dive into Churchill as his flaws and what he was going through emotionally?
Well, when you have an actor like Gary Oldman and also a director like Joe, these people, these characters from history suddenly become so real. They're, living, breathing, they're human. And so I think what this film really shows is Churchill at his darkest hour, and therefore you see this whole spectrum of him, who he was as a man. And I think seeing him via Clemmy, his wife, and seeing him via me adds a sort of more kind of domestic, although myself and Churchill, that's a work relationship. I think she sort of witnesses his very lowest moments. So you really see all the different sides of him.
Let's talk about Gary Oldman and forgetting Gary Oldman completely. I mean, he just doesn't exist behind that character. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, and Gary's able to do that as an actor, and there are very few actors that can do it. I think he's one of the greatest actors. He's, it was like I didn't know Gary anymore. And I'd hear Gary's voice coming out of Churchill when we wouldn't be rolling, which would be very surreal. So it was amazing for me, as like Kristen was saying in an interview, we all had to meet him there. We all had to be like, okay, well, he's Churchill, so we have to get there too. And, she was Clemmy, and it all felt very real, which is really refreshing.
And what did you also discover about that time, Churchill War Rooms, Churchill, places of work, etc., that you probably didn't know about what was going on, and that was surprising, especially the presence of women?
Yeah, we went and visited the War Rooms, which are sort of mind-blowing. They are in the exact condition that they were left when the war ended. I mean, down to the pencils, down to sort of sugar cube rations in the drawer. I mean, it's like a ghost town. It's like going back in time, and part of the War Rooms is now a Churchill Memorial Museum. And for me to see all those typist pools where all the women were working, and there's these accounts from these old ladies that are talking about their time in the war room, and it is, to me, so inspiring and so emotional. These girls that weren't allowed to tell their family where they were working, and they pretend they're going off to Whitehall, and down into the war rooms they go. And their part in the cogs that create war are invaluable. And
Are you able to gauge now what Churchill was about outside of history books? What's your opinion?
My opinion now is I just see what Gary has done with the part, and I believe that to have been based on the excessive sort of research that he did, and Joe, and and everyone. We did a month's rehearsal where we had lessons, but historians came in and spoke to us, and I think that Gary's captured a certain sort of inner life of the man that that hasn't been seen before.
I definitely haven't seen it, so that's
yeah.
So that means that a movie like that is an experience in itself more than a role, isn't it? It's just getting into a whole world. Is it interesting for you that every cinematic experience is exactly that, a different experience?
Yeah, it is. It's why I really love being an actor, is like you go from these different extremes of character and time and place and ways of working and costume. And I watched this film at the premiere the other night, and I was like, wow, it's almost like being in the audience member feels like they're in the war rooms, and a bit like Downfall felt like when I watched that movie, and it felt almost like a documentary, like it was like I was seeing a snapshot of history. And then I've just been working on another movie where I've been singing and dancing to ABBA on boats in the middle of the sea, and the opposite experience. So it's a wonderful job.
Exactly. That's the magic of movie making,
yeah,
isn't
exactly.
it? And do you feel it always goes the way you wanted, obviously with the success of Downton and the latter success that you had in cinema? You have the career that you've always dreamt of, or does it exceed expectations? How do you view it from your point of view?
Oh, it's exceeded my every expectation of the sort of thing people I've been getting to work with. I mean, I've just worked with Gary Oldman. I've just it doesn't compute. But there's always more. I think that's the sort of plight of being an actor, is that I think you're always wanting to challenge yourself, and you never quite get there. It sort of sends you insane. So I want to just keep going and keep working and keep having the opportunity to work with actors like Gary. And we just did a big interview together, and it's like listening to him talk about acting. It's like there's these little gems of information that kind of fuel my desire to want to keep doing this.
Exactly. Inside the Gary studio. Yes, I want to pick his brain sometimes.
Yeah.
he's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the ABBA experience?
It was just everything I wanted it to be and more. I loved every second. I was relatively cynical before I started, and I have had the time of my life, and I'm very excited. And it comes out so soon. It's like in summer, so we don't even have to wait very long.
Exactly.
I'll be back here.
To go again.
Yeah, here we go again.
And when you are surrounded by actors that infuse your love of acting, how much does it give you the energy to go out and give your best?
It really, really does, and especially again, like with Kristen Scott Thomas in this movie, she's a woman that I really admire, and I look up to her a lot, because I think she's sort of powerful and beautiful and brilliant, and that makes me want to keep doing it. When I meet women like her, I go, yeah, if I could kind of capture what you've captured and become what you've become, and it feels like a sort of very sort of dynamic, interesting life where you can achieve so much. So, yeah.